My name is Nora, and I was 31 years old the Christmas my mother called to tell. I finished my master's degree in urban planning at 26, took a position with the city of Hartwell doing zoning compliance work, and moved into a rental 2 streets over from my parent house, partly because the rent was manageable and partly because Cecile was by then 77 and I had started, quietly and without discussing it with anyone, to keep an eye on things. Not in an intrusive way. I just knew that Darren didn't check in much, and Patricia's calls were brief, and Cecile was the kind of person who would not ask for help even when she needed it, because she'd been self-sufficient for so long that she'd forgotten it was allowed. So I drove her to the cardiologist. I walked her to the pharmacy, when the sidewalk was icy. I sat at her kitchen table on Saturday mornings and drank the strong coffee she made, and listened to her talk about the neighborhood as it used to be, the shops that had closed, the families that had moved away, the elm tree on the corner that the city had cut down in 1987, and that she still hadn't forgiven anyone for. In return, she listened to me. She asked about my work. She remembered the names of my colleagues, the details of the projects I was running, the small frustrations I brought to her table, and left feeling lighter about. She gave advice the way she gave everything, without ceremony, without expecting credit, with the calm precision of someone who had seen enough of life to know which things actually mattered. My family knew I visited her. My mother had, in fact, complimented me on it once. In a specific way, she complimented things she found mildly impressive, but not especially important. "It's nice that you check on her," she'd said, the way you might say it's nice that someone volunteers at the library. A small, self-contained thing. A hobby, essentially. Not a relationship. Not something that would appear on any— It was a Saturday. I remember that specifically because I had worked a half day at the office and come home, changed into something presentable, and was wrapping a bottle of wine and a small plant for Cecile when my phone rang. My mother. I picked up expecting confirmation of arrival time. "Nora, I'm glad I caught you." Her voice had the particular quality it got when she'd already rehearsed what she was about to say. Warm, measured, slightly too deliberate. "I wanted to call before you got too far into your afternoon." I asked what was going on. "We've had to rethink the seating this year," she said. "Marcus's in-laws are coming. Well, I say in-laws, they've been together 3 years now. I imagine it's only a matter of time. And Ava's bringing the children plus her friend Rochelle and Rochelle's mother, who's just had her hip done and needs a chair with arms. So, it's just tight. It's genuinely tight this year, Nora, and I talked to her father, and we think it would be better for the peace of the day if we kept it to 12. You understand." I stood in my kitchen with the wine in one hand and the phone in the other, and something inside me went very quiet. Not the quiet of shock. More the quiet of a thing that had been waiting to be confirmed, finally, hearing the word it expected. Asked if Marcus's girlfriend's family counted as family. "They're going to be family," my mother said, and her voice didn't change. "You know how it is." I did, actually. I told her I understood. She said she'd call after the new year. She said it almost warmly, the way you say goodbye to a dentist's receptionist. I hung up. I put the wine in the cabinet. I stood at my window for a moment. Then I called Cecile. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't tell her what had happened, not directly. I asked if she'd eaten yet. She said she was just about to heat something up. I asked if I could come over. She said, "The door's already unlocked, Nora. It always is for you." That was the year that mattered. That was the year I ate Christmas dinner at Cecile's kitchen table. Roasted chicken, green beans with almonds, a pie crust that had more butter in it than was strictly medically advisable, while the snow came down outside, and Cecile told me about the first Christmas she'd spent alone after her husband passed, 30-some years before, and how she decided that day to stop waiting for the shape of her life to go back to what it had been, and to build something new with whatever was in front of her. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Now, I want to be precise about what was happening at my parents' house that I wasn't aware of. Not during that Christmas dinner, but in the months around it. Because while I was absorbed in my own quiet exclusion, something else had been occurring on the other side of the hedgerow. Darren, Cecile's nephew, had started calling more frequently. Not out of sudden familial warmth, it turned out, but because Cecile's house sat on a corner lot that a developer had been quietly circling for 18 months, and Darren had done some research and decided the property was worth considerably more than Cecile likely understood, and that if someone were to help her make a decision about it, That someone should probably be him.
I didn't know this at the time.
Cecile told me later that Darren had floated the idea of getting her affairs in order, twice that autumn, each time framing it as concern, each time segueing fairly quickly into questions about the house, the deed, what she'd thought about doing with the place, whether she'd considered that a condo might be more manageable. Cecile was 81, not impaired. She heard exactly what was being said. She just didn't say anything back, which is a thing she was very good at. What she did instead was call an attorney.
She didn't tell me.
She didn't tell anyone. She drove herself. She still drove then, short distances, to an estate attorney named Gerald Ashworth, whose name she'd gotten from her cardiologist's office manager, and she sat across from him and told him exactly what she wanted to do. She was clear.
She was specific.
She knew what documents needed to exist and what they needed to say. She came home, put the kettle on, and called me to ask if I wanted to come for coffee that Saturday.
I came.
She made the coffee. We talked about the neighborhood and whether the city was going to fix the stop sign at the corner that had been listing at a 45-degree angle since October. She did not mention Gerald Ashworth. She did not mention anything she had signed or notarized or filed. That was Cecile. She planted things quietly and let them grow. The second Christmas I spent alone, I brought Cecile a poinsettia, and she gave me a sweater she'd found at an estate sale that she said was exactly my color, which it was. The third Christmas, her cat, whose name was Leonard, decided to sleep across my feet for the entire meal, which I took as an endorsement. My family during those years remained consistent. My mother called to check in occasionally. My father less so. Marcus was absorbed in his life in a way that left little bandwidth for paying attention to mine. Ava was friendly, warm even, but our relationship existed mostly in the margins of larger family events, not on its own terms. No one asked me, in so many words, whether I was all right. No one seemed to register that 3 Christmases of you understand had accumulated into something. Patricia, Cecile's niece in Phoenix, called once in January of the 3rd year to ask whether Cecile had seemed sharp to me lately. I said she seemed exactly like herself. Patricia said good, in a way that suggested she'd been hoping for a different answer and wasn't sure what to do with the one she'd gotten. Darren came by in March of that year with a contractor. He told Cecile he was just getting some estimates for her benefit. Cecile thanked him politely and offered him a glass of water and didn't sign anything because there was nothing he could bring her that she needed to sign. I still didn't know what she'd put in place. I just knew that she was calm and clear and that the people circling her seemed to be getting more anxious while she got more serene. The 4th December began like the others. My mother called in mid-November, told me the table was going to be complicated again this year, said she hoped I understood, said she'd try to make it up to me in the new year. I told her it was fine. She said she knew it was. She sounded relieved. What was different was Cecile. In early December, about 3 weeks before Christmas, she called me on a Wednesday evening. She was a Saturday morning caller by preference, so a Wednesday call meant something, and asked if I could come over. I went that same evening. She was at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a folder in front of her, and she looked the way she always looked, composed, clear-eyed, and faintly amused by a world that continued to underestimate her. She told me she'd been thinking about what would happen if her health changed significantly. Not morbidly, Cecile didn't do morbid, just practically. She said she'd had some conversations with her attorney a few years back and had put certain documents in place, and she wanted me to know they existed. She didn't read them to me. She just told me what they covered and asked if I was willing to take on the responsibility they described. I told her I needed her to explain what she meant.
She told me.
I sat at her kitchen table for a long moment, and something settled in my chest that I didn't have a name for. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was more like the feeling of a door you'd always assumed was locked turning out to open. I said yes. She nodded, like I'd confirmed something she'd already known, and pushed the folder across the table to me and said, "Then you should probably have a copy of that." She also told me she'd had her attorney file a petition with the county court several months earlier. She'd done this, she explained, quietly and on her own initiative because she'd watched what Darren was doing and she'd watched what my family was doing. She'd known, I realized then, about the Christmas exclusions not from me but from a kind of patient attention that missed nothing, and she decided she was not going to wait for circumstances to arrange themselves poorly. The hearing had been scheduled. I didn't know the date. She told me. It was December 23rd. I went home that evening and sat in my car in my own driveway for a while before going inside. I was 34 years old, and the person who had known me best for the past 6 years was an 81-year-old woman who had, without saying a word about it, built a legal structure around the two of us because she decided I was worth protecting as much as she was. I thought about that for a very long time. December 23rd arrived cold and clear. The courthouse was quiet in the way government buildings are quiet in the week before Christmas, a particular echo-y stillness, like the building itself was waiting for something. I wore my work coat and my good boots because I treated formal occasions with formality, which was a thing Cecile had taught me without teaching me. I met Gerald Ashworth in the lobby. He shook my hand. He was a compact, careful man who spoke in complete sentences and didn't rush any of them. Cecile was already seated inside. She had on a dark green jacket and her hair pinned as always. She gave me a nod when I sat down next to her. The hearing itself was not dramatic. That's what I want to say about it because I think people imagine courthouses as theater, and sometimes they are, but that day it was very quiet and very orderly and very clear. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Wren, which I remember because I found the name appropriate, reviewed the petition, reviewed the documentation Gerald had filed, asked Cecile 2 direct questions about her capacity and her wishes, received 2 direct and entirely lucid answers, and signed the order. I was named Cecile's legal guardian of person and estate. Her financial accounts, her medical decisions, the house on the corner, all of it. The hearing lasted 22 minutes. Darren was not there. Patricia was not there. No one from either of their branches of Cecile's life had thought to inquire about what legal proceedings might be underway on her behalf. They had assumed, I think, that things were simply going to continue as they had been, that Cecile would remain in a kind of pleasant, accessible limbo until someone decided to do something about her. They had not accounted for the fact that Cecile had already done something about herself. Gerald filed the certified copy with the county that same afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the order was in the public record. My phone rang at 4:47. It was Darren. I let it go to voicemail. He called back. I let that go too. Then a text, just trying to reach Aunt Cecile. She isn't answering. Just checking in. I texted back. She's fine. I'll let her know you called. 30 seconds. Then, is everything okay? Has something happened?
I didn't answer that one.
At 6:14, Patricia called from Phoenix. I answered because I didn't recognize the number, and I thought it might be Gerald with a follow-up. This is Nora, I said. There was a pause.
Nora.
This is Patricia, Cecile's niece. Another pause. I've been trying to reach Cecile all afternoon. I told her Cecile was resting and had asked not to be disturbed. That was true. I understand there may have been some kind of court filing today. Her voice had the careful quality of someone working very hard to sound casual. I just want to make sure Cecile had the right information about whatever process she was involved in. I told her Cecile had had excellent legal counsel and had been fully informed throughout. I told her I was happy to pass along a message. The pause this time was longer. You were there? Yes, I said. I was there. She said she'd call back. She didn't call back that night. What happened next wasn't a single confrontation. It was more like a tide coming in, steady, incremental, impossible to stop once it had started moving. Darren retained his own attorney briefly, about 6 days after the order was filed. His attorney, to his credit, advised him fairly quickly that the petition had been properly filed, properly heard, and signed by a judge after a competency review that Cecile had passed without difficulty. There was no procedural error. There was no overlooked family right. There was a legal order and it was clean. His attorney withdrew about 2 weeks later. Darren sent Cecile a card in January. She put it on the mantel for a while, and then didn't. Patricia called me again in early January, this time with a different approach, warmer, more conciliatory, asking if she could come visit Cecile in the spring. I told her I'd pass that along. Cecile said she was welcome to visit as long as she called ahead, which I thought was more generous than strictly necessary, but Cecile was always more generous than strictly necessary. The contractor Darren had brought by in March didn't come back.
Now,
Here is what I did not expect. My mother called on December 27th. Not my father, not Marcus, not Ava, my mother, which meant she'd been the one to hear about it first, probably through a neighbor or someone in the block email chain who'd noticed something in the county filings, because small towns and close neighborhoods have a way of distributing information that no one ever formally plans for. She called at 10 in the morning. I was at Cecile's, helping her put away the good dishes after a quiet Christmas. The two of us, Leonard the cat, and a bottle of wine Cecile had been saving for what she called a year that earned it. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. Nora. My mother's voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Not cold, not warm, but careful. Like she was walking on a surface she hadn't tested yet. I had no idea you were so close with Cecile. I said we'd been close for a long time. I didn't realize the extent of it. A pause. I saw something about a court order. I confirmed there was a court order. Another pause. Longer. Nora, we'd love to have you for New Year's. We're keeping it small, just family, and there's room. There's absolutely room. Something went very still in me. Not anger, exactly. More like the feeling of finally understanding the exact dimensions of a room you've been standing in for years. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I already had plans. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was putting away Cecile's dishes. She didn't have a follow-up to that. Marcus called 2 days later. He was warmer about it than my mother had been. He had a particular talent for making things sound casual that weren't. And he asked a few general questions about how the whole guardianship process worked, which I answered straightforwardly because they were reasonable questions. And then he mentioned that he and his girlfriend were thinking about doing a New Year's trip. Nothing fancy, just somewhere with good food. And did I want to join them? I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for about 4 seconds and then let it go. Ava sent a text. I heard about Cecile. That's really incredible, Nora. I mean that. I believed her. Of all of them, Ava was the one who said things she actually meant. I wrote back and told her thank you. We made plans to have lunch in January, just the two of us, which was something we'd never done before, and it turned out to be a genuinely nice afternoon. I don't want to be hard on Ava. She was working with what she had, same as most people. The property, I should say, is not the point of this story. Cecile's house, her accounts, the corner lot that the developer had been circling, none of that is the heart of what happened. But because I know people will wonder, the guardianship covers her financial affairs, which means decisions about her assets are made in her best interest, reviewed by the court, and not available as an opportunity for someone with a contractor's estimate and a family relationship to exploit. The developer's inquiry was politely and finally declined. The house is Cecile's for as long as she wants it. What happens after is in her estate documents, which is her business and Gerald Ashworth's, and not mine to detail here. What I will say is that Cecile is 82 now. She still makes coffee that is stronger than is medically advisable. Leonard still sleeps on my feet when I visit. The pie crust still has too much butter in it, and it is still the best thing I eat all year. There was a moment, a few months after the order was signed, when I was driving Cecile back from a cardiology appointment, and we were stopped at a light, and she said out of nowhere, the way she said most things worth saying, "You know what I decided that first Christmas after Raymond died?" I asked what. "I decided that family wasn't the people you were assigned," she said. "It was the people who showed up when showing up cost them something."
the light changed.
I pulled forward. I thought about 12 seats at a table I'd been asked to leave, and a kitchen 2 houses over where the door was always unlocked and the coffee was always on, and someone was always glad to see me. "You showed up," I said. She looked out the window.
"So did you," she said.
"Every Saturday. For 6 years. Don't undercount yourself." I didn't have anything to say to that. I just drove. I want to tell you the thing I actually learned, which is this. The people who take you for granted are operating on an assumption that your patience is a permanent feature of the landscape, like weather, like gravity, like something that requires no upkeep and carries no consequence. They are not accounting for what happens when the landscape shifts. They are not watching the paperwork. They are not paying attention to what the quiet person is doing while they're busy arranging the seating chart. They should have been. That's my story. A flower-covered apron, a notarized folder, and a pot of too strong coffee. If you were Darren's attorney, the one who reviewed the guardianship order and had to advise him it was airtight, what would you have said to him in that meeting? And if you were me, sitting at that New Year's table with 12 seats that had just gotten very interesting to my family, would you have gone? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.